Today we're going to talk about API versioning in Spring. Just a show of hands, who's doing versioning now? Anybody? We got a few hands here and there. Well, good. Well, hopefully we can teach you something and maybe find out a little bit about versioning and what's new coming in Spring. My name is Spencer Gibb. I've been on the Spring team for 11 years now. I'm the co-founder and lead of Spring Cloud. I have a couple colleagues in the back. There's my socials and everything. Huge shout out to Rasen Stoyanchev, who's on the framework team. A lot of this work that has been done, not only for the presentation, but for the features in general, was done by him. So shout out to him. He's located in the EU, so I'm happy to fill in his shoes today. So today I want to talk a little bit about API versioning, what it is in general, add a little bit of perspective to it, because it's on the face it might seem like a simple topic, but there's some subtlety to it. So we'll talk a little bit about that, and then we're going to take a tour of the features that are not only in Spring Framework, but also Spring Boot and a little bit of Spring Cloud sprinkled in there at the end as well. So why is it even important? Well, this has to do with the evolution of an application, right? It's typical developers, we go through iterative change, and how do we deal with those changes, right? It's not an easy balance to strike. How fast do we go? Is it daily? Is it weekly? Is it monthly? How does it happen? How frequently do you change in your organization? Another thing is that if you go Google API versioning, or whatever your search engine is that you might like, practical advice is actually pretty difficult to come by. Typically what you see is how to do a specific style of versioning, request headers, parameter, path, version in the path or whatever like that. There's just not a lot of advice out there. Does anyone not know who Roy Fielding is? A few of you, okay. So you've used this thing called a browser, right? HTTP is this protocol. He was one of the authors of the HTTP spec and the originator of REST, right? We have RESTful APIs. That's it. That's him. So he says don't, right? And so when you have an authoritative person carries that much weight, it can be a little daunting or a little confusing. But I mean, you go to your favorite website, whatever that is, you don't see a version, right? There's no version on the VMware.com website or Broadcom.com, right? Whatever your favorite, they don't do that, right? He kind of says that applications should evolve in a backwards compatible manner. And he talks about the scale of decades on a timeline and not anticipating anything ever breaking. Well, if you look at that with a critical eye, that's pretty difficult to manage. For one thing, nowadays at least, browsers are typically owned and engineered by large corporations, right? There are some community things, but even those, right, there's a lot of work going on. If server-side changes, the server-side drives what is sent to the browser, right? So if that side changes, well, the browser can be updated to understand those changes, right? You don't ever look and see, hey, I need to upgrade my browser because there's a new version of JavaScript. Like, you don't do that. Most of us probably have automated updates of our browser, and it just happens. Whether that's new CSS, new JavaScript, whatever it is, it's pretty easy for the browser to adapt to that. Humans do too, right? I mean, your favorite web app, you go in, oh, hey, look, they updated the UI. Well, I typically do this, and yeah, it's not hard to change because we're humans, we're adaptable, Here and I go into the hotel room, it's the same thing. Here's the bathroom, there's the bed, there are the light switches. They might be different than I've ever seen before, but we deal with it. A machine client, on the other hand, it's not so easy to deal with, right? So new field, how would a machine client know how to deal with that new field, or a removed field, or the data looks a little different than it used to? It's not so easy to deal with it. So favoring backwards compatibility, while a good goal and might be the goal that we strive for, it's very, very difficult. There are lots of circumstances. Organizationally, the type of application that you have, right? There are just some apps and domains that have different requirements. Some might not ever need versioning. But it's, trying to reconcile what our organization and our application needs versus what is out there on the internet is difficult. And it's very, very hard to predict. So one of the strategies, right, if we make a change that's not backwards compatible, he makes the point, well, maybe this is a whole new thing, right? A whole new system, right? Maybe an example is like car models, right? I drove when I was a teenager, just a little while ago, a Ford Bronco, right? There's still Ford Broncos today. It's the same. It's just a new model of the same name, but a very, very different car than what I drove in when I was a teenager. So, it's new site. There may be loose associations with the old one. So, but it allows deep structural change. So we could also say that a new URL, we can kind of consider that like a new version of the site as well. Put the version in the path, and we can deal with that way. In contrast, using some metadata in the requests as opposed to a fully different request to a new host name or a new path, using a header or a query parameter or something like that, your URLs stay the same. It's the same entities. It's the same kind of information you're looking for. This allows for things like formatting of the data, refinement, adding new fields, dropping ones that we don't need anymore. But the version gets sent kind of independently of those requests. There are some limits to this, obviously, but this allows you to do things in a gradual manner as opposed to, a new site, new path is a whole big bang and can be difficult in and of itself. So we can kind of put these things on a spectrum, right? On the one side, you have that I will always be backwards compatible, right? I mean, for decades, it worked for companies like Intel in the hardware space, right? They're always backwards compatible. I found software I wrote in high school when I was in college and put it in my floppy drive and ran it. It still worked. It was amazing. Backwards compatibility, very, very difficult, right? There's a lot of baggage that could come with that, trying to maintain backwards compatibility. Then in the middle, we kind of have this lightweight change using a header request parameter. Or we have this structural change, like this new thing. But it can vary based on the domain, the organization, how frequent. A finance application, some new something coin comes up and now they have to deal with that thing and use that, right? Whatever the case may be, we have this spectrum that we can deal with. Another common thing you might hear is that, we're building a new API, we're going to build in version, we're going to future-proof our API, right? We're going to build it in from the start. In my experience I kind of compare it to optimization, right? Premature optimization. I don't know what I'm going to need, what's going to be the bottleneck, but it's kind of a similar thing here, right? You're kind of doing it as insurance. You're protecting yourself for the future. But again, that can lead to problems down the road if it's not exactly what you or your users need or want. we've kind of taken the approach that you don't need to start out with versioning, and you can add it as needed later. And we'll get into that a little bit. But starting out, assuming unversioned, and then we will, and if you don't ever get a version, that original API is still there. But how do we manage version information? Because it's a lot more than just expressing what a version is. We'll talk about that too, but there's a lot more to it than just saying what a version is. So we want the ability to do selective versioning by endpoint. So as we go, we might decide, hey, you know what, this just isn't working out the way this field is. We want to send the full name, just maybe not the first name and last name. We've evolved beyond that. Lots of people that have like 4 or 5 middle names might not fit those culturally, so we need to support more, that kind of thing. And so when we do that, what we want to do is be able to selectively go into that individual endpoint and say, here, this is a new version of this endpoint, just this one, not the whole API, not the whole app. So 1.1 might have a little changes here, 1.2 and some other controller, some other endpoint might have a little change there. And but how do we deal with that? What does that look like in practice? Because on the initial blanch, it's like that might be a difficult thing to do, doing it piece by piece here and there. But if we have good tools, we can be more relaxed about it. And regardless of how we are doing versioning ourselves, it's out there, right? I mean, any of you used one of these APIs that are, I see lots of heads nod, yeah, right? And they all have different ways of doing it, right? There's all those, I'll put, the slides will be available later with these links in them, but everybody has their own little details on how they do versioning and how long a version is supported, right? Like they may support them for a year or two, and they talk about those kinds of things. For example, Microsoft, you can use the path or a query parameter, right? Interesting choice of how they, I don't know why they picked those two, but everybody has a little different way of doing it. Even the versioning, Microsoft has some interesting ways that you can express a version, and we'll talk about how you can do some of those kinds of things. So let's talk about API versioning in Spring. There's not been explicit support. In the past, you had to do hand-rolled craft API versioning, right? Small batch API versioning. My team has done it. One of the components of Spring Cloud is config server. We needed to change the shape of the data to be able to add a new feature. So the config client uses a header, and we have custom crafted our 2 endpoints that, depending on what the media type is, but we also control the client, so it's not that bad, right? But we've done it. So that's that issue on Spring Framework has been around for a long time, and we were waiting. It's kind of a tricky topic. There's a lot of nuances. But we wanted to provide something that was really feature-rich and provided an easy way to manage versioning. So API versioning in Framework is not enabled by default, right? It's something that you have to enable, and you have to describe what you need. And on the server side, we have support in both Spring Web MVC and WebFlux, right? So, and we also have support for, we kind of have a matrix, right? There's Web MVC and WebFlux, and then there's the controller style, the annotation controller style, then there's the functional version. We have support in all of those, so all 4. And we have strategies to extracting versions, parsing them, and validating them. All right, let's see if I can make the screen not mirror so I can get to the demo. Mirror. You seeing what I'm seeing? Sweet. Go away. All right. So let me describe first a little bit about this simple application that we're going to be showing. We have two controllers. Everybody see that all right? So these are backed by just a simple repository and a map, right? This is the important part of the demo application, just to let you know what's going on. We currently have just one endpoint. It's enough to demonstrate with the get by ID. We also have a statement controller, very similar thing here. There's no configuration for versioning right now, so if I come here, I can show you the application. Very, very simple Spring Boot application. I happen to be using snapshots, so hope this all works right today. We'll go ahead and run our server. Looks like it started up on port 8080 there. Go ahead and, so, oh, it's like it went black. I was like, my screen's black, that's the terminal. Yeah. If you learn nothing today, and you've never heard of this tool I'm going to use to do my command line requests, it's called HTTPy. Has anyone heard of HTTPy? We have a few, right? For those of you who have not heard of HTTPy, you've heard of curl, right? Everybody's heard of curl. I like to call this curl for humans. So we'll go ahead and make some requests here. So you can HTTP 8080. I don't have to put the scheme. I don't have to put the host name. It just assumes HTTP. It assumes localhost. So I can go ahead and say accounts, and I give it my ID, right? Beautiful, color-coded. I can formatted, right? HTTPy. If you learn nothing else today, you've got a new tool in your toolbox. All right. We're going to go ahead and implement versioning in our application. So let's say that we want to add a new version of get account, right? We've added some piece of data. I'm not actually going to change the data, but you'll see how this works throughout the demo. So we have added this new method to get account 1.1. We'll be able to see in the logs of the application when I make the request which controller method is actually getting used. And there are a couple ways to add versioning. So when Rawson originally did this, all his demos, he was doing some little more advanced Java configuration. I'll show that to you in a little bit. But for now, since the man is sitting here in the back corner, Phil added support in Spring Boot for API versioning. So for this first little bit, we're going to use our application properties. So there's a new suite of properties under the prefix Spring MVC. Since we're doing an MVC app, there'd be WebFlux otherwise. API version. And I'll show you what some of these things are. For now, I'm going to use this one right here, use header. So this tells Spring Framework where to get the version, right? So I'm going to call it X API version. There are other things we could do, just to give you an idea, version.use. So we have this media type parameter, right? So media types can have parameters inside of them, which is pretty slick. This is exactly what Spring Cloud Config Server is doing. We're using the media type parameter. You can use a path segment. We'll get to that later in the demo. You can also use a query parameter. You can also do custom things, and I'll show you where you can plug into that in a little bit. But let's go ahead and restart our application. Make this bigger so we can see what happens down here. So let's go ahead and make our same requests. So no versioning, right? I didn't pass that header. And we got our original account, right? So we got this guy. So in HTTP, if you want to add a header, you just add some parameters here separated by a colon. And that means if it's colon separated, it's a header. So X, I think we called it API-version, right? Now if I say 1.1, we get the same data back, which is great. Come back to our IDE, and you can see that account 1.1 was picked, right? All right, so let's go ahead and do we previously launched version 1, now we just launched version 1.1. We're gonna make version 1.2 now, okay? We need something new in the statement controller. So we're gonna do something similar here. We are going to add our new 1.2 method. Don't worry, I'll show you what that plus is here in a little bit. I go ahead and restart this. Oh, I don't like that. I have to resize the text every time. So let's go up here. Count. It's just statements. So here we get our version 1, right, of statements, our old one. So now if I want to do 1.2 X API version 1.2, worked great. One of the things that you'll notice as Spring engineers, we like to prove that what we did worked, right? So I was right. So there it is. We used our new method, right? So even though the data didn't actually change, we can show you that it's actually picking the right thing. Well, so now what might happen if I come back here to just accounts and say 1.2, I get an error, right? Because there's nothing in accounts that says it supports version 1.2. Make sense? So I'll show you how we can take care of that in a fairly simple manner, right? We come back here to account controller. So this is version 1, this is version 1.1. Nothing here supports version 2. Well, that's probably not how you want to operate in this kind of selective endpoint by endpoint versioning, right? So we have this little addition we can make here called 1.1 plus. So what we've introduced here is a range. And so framework can now decide, hey, this works for not only 1.1, but also 1.2, 1.3, anything greater than 1.1. So now if I go ahead and restart my app one more time, get big again there, come try this request again, and there it worked, right? We picked Even though the version I requested was 1.2, we got back the method that says 1.1 plus, okay? Let's go ahead and show path. How we can do this with a path. So this time, I'm not going to use we'll show you the Java way, the config way of doing this. So there is a class in Spring Framework called WebMVC Configurer that allows you to override a number of methods, do customization. So we're going to use that to do path. So let's get a little snippet here. I'm not Josh. Who knows Josh Long, right? Everybody, right? I can't do what he does. He can type this in like 5 seconds. So yeah, this is me. Copy paste, right? Not Josh. He is amazing, isn't he? By the way. All right. So here we are. I have 2 methods overridden. So this method is new in Framework, configure API versioning. So we get this callback API version configurer, and we are telling it we want to use path segment 0. So that means the first element in the path is going to be our version. I've also told Framework about a version. I told it about version 1. By default, what Framework does is it will look through your controllers for these version attributes or the version predicate if you're using the functional API and gather the versions that you have. But if you need to explicitly define the list, you can do that. The other thing I'm going to do is, I didn't know about this until Rawson showed this to me, but you could certainly go and add this prefix to every controller. We only have 2 right here, fine. I guarantee you that most APIs that exist have way more than 2. So to go do this to everyone would be kind of a bit of a pain, but you can configure Spring MVC to automatically add this path in front of everything, okay? So let's go ahead and restart one more time. Back to our console here. Let's get back to accounts. So this will not work anymore, right? So we need that. That worked, right? Our old account statement. Let's go ahead and edit that. Let's just go straight to 1.2 to see that our plus still works, right? Still works. I guess I proved myself here, account 1.1. So we've not really talked about this version here, have we? By default, Spring Framework uses semantic versioning as the versioning here. But like all things, we kind of make it flexible. You've seen me use a single digit. You've seen me use 2 digits. I could do this and it still works, right? So basically, if you leave off one of the right-hand digits, it will assume .0. So when I was doing 1, what actually got returned when it parsed it all out was 1.0.0. When I did 1.2, it assumed 1.2.0, okay? But I think it's super nice because you don't typically want to deal with that patch version unless you have a very, very special edge case or something like that in your controllers. But whatever you need, it will support. So speaking of versioning, I'm not going to add this, but I will show you the snippet here. No, that's what I just had. Like everything in Spring, you can implement your own, right? So here we have a custom version parser. The same method that we were using before, we just set the version parser here. And in fact, this is an example of what Microsoft does. Since they have so many APIs, they group them into a date. So they might release a number of versions of things around a particular date, and they map a date to a version. So what we've done here is we've extended the default semantic version API parser and added a way to parse that date. So basically what happens is if the version matches the date pattern, we're going to get it out, use that to look up the version, right? We have a simple map up here. So we would pick one of these versions. Otherwise, it's not a date. Use the old semantic, use the normal semantic versioning parser. And you'll notice this is a string, right? Everything in the requests is string, right? All the headers, all the parameters, whatever. We decided to be more flexible, not you think semantic versioning, you think those are integers, those should be done that way, but it's a string. And so we're treating all of it like that because these dates are not digits, right? We need a flexible way to handle that, and doing it as a string is what we came up with. All right. So let's get back to we also have client support. So REST template, web client, HTTP Exchange interface clients. One place that does not have this support is REST template. Okay. So let me show you a little bit about client support. First off, I need to undo this because our clients are expecting a header. So we'll go back to this, okay? Restart that guy. Zoom in so we can see. So we're going to start with REST client, okay? First of all, we have to configure the REST client so this is the opposite side of the server, right? It's not a use, where do I get the version? It's how do I insert the version? So we have something called a API version inserter. If you're all familiar with Spring, our naming is very, very straightforward and boring and long, right? But you know exactly what's happening, right? So we have a helper class with some static methods that makes it easy for us to just pass this header version here. Okay, so and this could be done, we're doing them side by side right here, right? This could be done in your company's framework configuration. They've configured the REST client and you just get it, right? But you also need to now say what version to send, right? So this is the actual client use here. There is this new method on REST client and web client called API version. Yeah, this is the bug. I didn't downgrade. Anyway, this all works even though that retrieve method is red. So let's go ahead and run this guy. You can see we called get. We got our information back. If I come back over to the server, we picked get account 11. Yay? Okay. Interface clients. If you haven't seen interface clients before, it's a declarative way to make a client instead of the imperative way I just showed with REST client, right? So this, you describe the request and then something underneath does it. Could be REST client, could be web client, right? It's very, very flexible. So what do we do here? There's a new attribute called version 1.1, okay? One more restart of our server application here. actually need to come to my interface client. And I also need to tell the REST client that the same thing we did in the previous one, add the API version inserter here, right? And then what happens is these proxy factories know how to get that attribute, that version from that attribute, and put it in the request as a header at this point. So if I run this guy, there's our response, and again, account 11, okay? Well done. All right. Back to our slides here. We did that. Framework has also added testing support for this, okay? So there are a few styles of testing. Pull up this guy. So this is a full, there it is again. We've got JetBrains guys down here in the front. They're like, yeah, I know. I know. So this is a full-on Spring Boot test, right? If you don't know, this is a full integration test. We bring up a web server, we make a real HTTP request. So this is testing both sides, client side, server side. But this is using web test client. So he wanted to show that it mirrors REST client and web client, right? The API, so it's very, very familiar, but it has those assertions at the end, which are just so chef's kiss, right? So here we can add API version, but we still need to tell the web test client builder with our web test client builder customizer how to insert that header again. So if I can go ahead and run a client test, this should all work and it's green, right? It spun up the web server, made the request. Now the next one uses mock MVC, right? The old style, basically the same thing we just did, except doesn't bring up the web server. It's mocked, hence mock MVC. The old version of mock MVC was a bunch of static methods and wasn't really nice to use, or at least friendly for a developer. But there's a new thing, another new tool here that you could use called mock MVC tester that gives you that fluent API almost exactly like web test client. There's also a new REST test client if you didn't know. Super awesome. All right, same thing. We have to customize mock MVC to know to use the how to insert the version. Again, I can run this test and it all works and is green. The last test I want to show you is basically the same exact as the previous one, except this is a slice test. So this is testing just one controller, otherwise identical to our last test. Okay, all green there. So I am going to stop our server. Make sure that guy stopped. All right. The last bit I want to talk about is Spring Cloud support. This is my team. This is what we do, and so it's near and dear to my heart here. So we have two versions of Gateway Server now, the WebFlux version and the WebMVC version. They both have now a version predicate where you can pick a route based on the version. You configure your application the same way. It's just a Spring Boot application, so you just set that up the same way. And we are also, there is a pull request, if I'm not mistaken, Ryan, of load balancer support. So you'll be able to filter instances when you choose on a load balancer based on version, which we are really, really excited about, right? So you're automatically picking the right version. So let's go ahead and come back to IntelliJ and switch projects. So first off, I want to show you my YAML file here real quick, right? Same thing you saw before, now it's in YAML version. I don't want to require a version, right? So if you were adding this is a good practice, not requiring it. I've set a default version, and again, our same thing, XAPI version, we're doing it with a header. So I'm using Spring Boot's test main application support and its support for test containers to bring up HTTP bin when I run my application here. So if I come here and show you this test, this bit of route configuration, not doing anything special, but here is our predicate version, right? And same syntax that you would use in the attribute, right? In this case, 2.0 plus. And what I'm doing to differentiate is I'm adding a response header with that same string. So here we have a 1.0 version. So let me show you what this looks like when I make a request. So I make this request to 2.0.1, and you see we returned from the 2.0 route. If I do this again and do 1. I'm showing the full 3 version thing, right? I could do 1.1. Oh, dang, there was a 1.1. It works. We return from the 1.0 route, right? What if I do something that we don't know about, right? 0.9.0. We get a 400 class exception. In this case, there's some other route in my demo that makes it a 415. If it were blank, you would have seen a 404 here, right? It just wouldn't have known that there's a route that doesn't have that. And we've successfully come to the end of our demos, and they all worked. Yay, that's a good day, a really good day for a demo. Explorer wants you to do this thing, right? If you want to take a picture, give you a few seconds. So all of this code that you have seen, I will put up the slides later today on this first repository. All of that is here, as well as the link to the snapshot documentation for API versioning. If you have any questions, I'm happy to take them until they tell me you have to leave. Yes?
When you set the version REST client, it didn't look like...
When I set the version in the REST client, it did not look like a string. So let us go back to this guy, and you are correct. It takes an object and does toString on it. Because anyway. So that means you can pass something complex and it could do something, but it ends up a string. I didn't even notice that one. That's funny. Other questions? Yes?
So for that last endpoint, was there defaulted to 1.0? Set that default?
I sent it. Let's do the demo again. If I send nothing, we get 1.0. But because I sent a version that it did not know about, I can't use the default, right? Because it pulled it out of the header. Yeah, good, great question. Others? If not, or if you're shy and want to ask me, sure. Yes, so you can do it in the YAML, just like this, or in the Java, right? Like where I did the path, there is a set default version in the Java config as well. Yep. Yes?
On the REST client builder, is there a way?
On the REST client builder itself, no. Just in the configurer of, Yep. Yes?
You set one endpoint to have 0 plus, and then another to have 1.0.0 plus.
No, it creates a range. So if you have 1.1 plus and then 1.5 plus, but you don't have 1.2, 3, or 4, those will default to the 1.1 plus, and then once you hit 1.5, it will move. It goes to the highest matching version. All right, if you have other questions, you can find me down on the floor or in the hallway after. Thank you very much. Appreciate your time.